Welcome to Enigma of the Unknown. Tonight, we're venturing into the eerie world of the Dogman, a creature that's part man, part beast, and entirely terrifying. Whether you're a skeptic or a believer, these real-life encounters will make you question what's lurking in the shadows. Picture yourself deep in the woods, surrounded by silence, until you hear something big moving just out of sight. Tonight, I'll be sharing 4 spine-chilling stories of encounters with the Dogman that will make you think twice about venturing into the wilderness alone. Ready? Let's begin. Story number 1. Dogman encountered during camping trip. Hello, my name is Shaggy Satter, but you can call me Shaggy for short. I'm going to recant a story of mine that I tell rarely. My own family don't even know about this. And while that might sound weird to you, trust me, it makes more sense to tell internet strangers than the people I'm forced to be around. Mr. X Dreams, an amazing narrator, once read this story for his channel, and I'm happy with the discussion it got. But I believe it's time to rewrite the story to clear up confusions. So without further explanation, let me get into my story. This happened when I was much younger. I'd have to ask my parents when the camping trip happened to tell you how many years ago it was. But I can assure you it was at least a decade. Now I'm going to use some questionable words for describing the location. Words like wooded and wilderness reserve, because I don't know the best words for this thing. Around a decade ago, a friend from church asked me to join his family on a camping trip to a wilderness reserve called Oasis State Park. Of course, since this was my best friend and his family had always been nice, I said yes. Up until that point, I had only camped rarely. So the prospect of camping with a friend and his family seemed absolutely amazing. So we began preparing for a weekend when I wasn't busy. I got my own tent, my own sleeping bag, and my own supplies. Once all that was gathered, the father of the friend came and picked me up, and my parents waved me off. There are quite a few things I remember from that trip. The amazingly hostile yet beautiful New Mexico countryside, the plateaus, and the campsite. The New Mexican wilderness isn't something a lot of people fantasize about camping in, at least not so far as I know. But Oasis State Park is different. The camping plots are all nice, even if the best are always taken. There's a pretty lake, lots of wildlife, and I hate to admit, more trees than I've ever seen in town. Yeah, I know nobody thinks of multitudes of trees when they think of New Mexico, and for good reason. They aren't the most common occurrence in the plains unless planted by people. Regardless, Oasis has enough for me to just use the term woods for the sake of brevity. So anyways, we found ourselves a plot and began setting up our tents. By afternoon, the tents were set and me and my friend ditched his oh-so-boring younger sister in favor of exploring the park. The memories are fantastic. We found a snake by the lake and watched it drink from the water before slithering off quickly. We explored a place I remember was very sandy. We watched a roadrunner doing its thing. We played all day after lunch and saw so many amazing things that by the end of the day, I never would have thought anything could go wrong. We finished the day like you always do, by collecting sticks and starting a fire to eat s'mores and tell ghost stories. None of the stories were scary, probably because me and my friend were kids and his sister was an even younger child. That and his father was lead singer at our church, and making children cry was bad for reputation. So by ghost stories, I mean little jokes of stories designed to make us giggle more than cry. Yeah, it was lame, but what do you expect? Anyways, shortly after the stories were said and s'mores were eaten, we retired, me to my tent and my friend, his father, and his sister to their tent. Now for this setup, I'll explain positioning. This is all going to be important. My tent was at one edge of the plot and my friend's tent was at the exact opposite. This was for privacy reasons. Now at my end of the plot was a mini trail that led through thick brush to the lake. Also about 3 feet from my tent was a little tree. What kind of tree it was, but it was still young and small. The trail to the lake was to the left of my tent entrance. The lake was behind it, and a thin tree line sat across a trail in front of my tent. That trail in front of my tent led to the bathrooms. So I went to bed without a single bit of fear. And before I did, I went ahead and urinated on the tree outside my tent because of laziness. Screw the 2-minute walk to the bathrooms when nature's toilet was outside my tent. So I finished closing up my tent for the night and climbed into my sleeping bag to go to bed. I don't know how long I slept, but when I woke I had to use the bathroom. And it wasn't the kind of pottying I could do on a tree, or at least not reasonably. So I, not being a moron who'd wander through the dark, grabbed my little lantern. I flipped on my LED lantern and I unzipped the inner flap of my tent before the outer, as if that little nylon net could protect me from what I was about to see. Now I should mention that outside of cities in New Mexico, it's quite common to hear coyote howls. It's a nightly occurrence when camping. Heck, even up in a little village like Logan, you can hear the howls from your bedroom. It isn't so unnerving when you're in a house, but when you got some flimsy nylon walls to protect you and that's it, well, it isn't the most comforting sound. As I unzipped my tent flap, I did hear a few howls, but they were distant and not worrying. What stunned me into stillness was a very loud howl from the direction of the lake, about a yard from my tent at most. This howl was different though. It had the feel of a coyote howl, but it was deeper, and it lasted longer. I simply sat there petrified at what I heard. I wouldn't be able to guess at how long I sat there breathing hard with my fingers still grasping the zipper. But however long it may have been was just long enough for the thing that made that howl to come up the trail next to my tent. Suddenly I heard the crunching of claws on dirt, and after that, claws on the rocks that made our camping plots. Then I saw the largest shadow made by a living creature that little kid me had ever seen. It lumbered heavily in the direction of the sparse tree line where I assumed the other howling had come from. But before it got past the tree I urinated on, it stopped. I realized only then that I was both lit like a candle and had not been trying to silence my heaving breathing. By then it was too late, as that hulking thing lumbered over closer to the tree and into the light of my lantern. As dim as the little LED light was at that distance, it was just barely enough to make out details. I'd like to note a few very important details that stuck out to me as odd. It had roughly the fur coloring of a coyote, but that classic Dogman head shape with the tiny pointed ears too small to make sense. It also made strange noises as it lowered to all fours in front of my tent. Popping sounds like joints rubbing together, as I can only assume its knees busted out of their standing joints and fell into different joints to support all fours. It briefly ignored the very obviously frightened kid me in my tent as it sniffed the tree I had urinated on. The breaths were similar to a dog's, but longer and far deeper, almost like a horse's. Then that thing turned to me and stared straight into my eyes. Its eyes didn't glow. They didn't peer into my soul, but they were unbelievably unnatural. Above all the things I saw in those eyes, I saw a predator. Have you ever been in a position where you made eye contact with a beast you know is stronger than you? Something you know could just slaughter you, and you know it knows you know. Just looking for seemingly so damn long that I thought for sure I'd just be a bloody stain by the time anyone reached my tent. Screaming would do nothing. I doubted a gun would even hurt this thing. But despite every feeling in my gut, despite the dread of knowing it was predator and I was prey, I didn't die. Instead it turned, slowly, ever so slowly, and just fucking sprinted off into the woods. Just fucking gone into the night faster than it came. I have one personal friend who knows, and he jokes that made it was my piss on that tree. Like I marked my territory or something dumb like that. Or maybe it just wasn't hungry. Or most improbable, it had just enough morals to not kill a kid. I'll never really know. Needless to say, I didn't go to the bathroom. I just put my lantern away, closed my tent flap, and held it all night. I don't remember sleeping that night. I might have, I might not, but if I did, it was dreamless. I do remember that I tried to hide this experience the next day, asking if my friend and his family heard any howling. While they did hear the howling, they told me they just ignored it, thinking it was a coyote doing coyote stuff. I was encouraged to just ignore it, as if I was a city kid who had never heard coyote howling before. That next day, I stayed as close to my friend as possible while exploring and had nearly forgotten the encounter by lunch. Somehow the safety I had been feeling during the day put the beast out of my mind, until we found tracks in that super sandy place. Coyote tracks. I think seeing those tracks confirmed to me that it wasn't just some dream. And because of that, I showed enough fear that night to convince my friend's family to let me sleep in their tent. Even in the comfort of a warmer tent, more people means more warmth, and in the presence of an adult, the father, and two other people, friend and his sister, couldn't sleep that night. I'd nearly drift into sleep and then I'd hear a coyote howl. The next day, I pretended to be sick and got my mother to drive up and take me home a day or two early. Worst camping trip of my life. It ruined not only my whole summer, but also ruined camping. I haven't been camping without a tent buddy since, and I don't plan to. Even then, I'm never comfortable. Always listening for strange noises and acting paranoid. This really fucked me up, I guess. Being forced to see that a human top of the food chain is utterly powerless in front of such a beast. Seriously, I don't think I can press hard enough to make everyone realize how powerless I felt. Even today, when I think about this, I remember two things first. Those eyes, and that feeling. Just writing this sent multiple shivers up my spine. That said, you might be asking why I'm talking about this again if it terrifies me so much. Simple. I both want answers, and I want to add to the conversation. I feel the need to add this encounter so that others can experience it. Maybe contact me with questions or answers. So let me say now that if you have any idea what happened that night, please respond or DM. If you have any questions, go ahead and do the same. Story number 2. Central Michigan camping horror. I have always loved camping. There is something about being out in a tent away from electronics and everyday life that gives me a sort of reminder that I'm not totally dependent on civilization and phones to survive. I know that not bringing my phone is where I made my biggest mistake, but hey, it's Michigan. We don't have scary predators here that cause me to worry, and I knew these particular woods very well. Never experienced anything bad before, so I figured it was as safe of a place to be. It was my younger brother Todd, my sister Amy, and her husband Don, and me. All of us agreed no phones, just tents, beer, and a relaxing time away from life. Well, I thought it was going to be relaxing. You can choose to believe what you will, but this did happen, and my life is never going to be the same. We all rode together in my sister's van and parked at the site we used to party at as teenagers. Even camped here a few times, but had about 5 more people with us. Ugh, the spider spot. Really? Amy complained. When we first found this spot years before, there was an old stump that was littered with wolf spiders. We burned it to the ground after waking up to big nasty spiders all over us after a night of drinking. So we named it the spider spot. Come on, that stump's gone. Besides, it's only a quarter-mile walk and my feet have been killing me from work. Todd sighed. We all grabbed our shit and started walking the 10 to 15-minute walk, looking forward to the fire and, of course, beer. The worst part of the walk was the damn broken branches that seemed to jump out just to stab your face and break off. After we finally got there, we did the usual, setting tents up and grabbed firewood so the rest of the night would be filled with beer. Laughter, then bed after about 25 creepy nighttime pissing trips. It must have been around 1:30 a.m. when things started getting weird. Hey, did you guys hear that? Don asked, shushing everyone. We sat quietly and after a few seconds heard the unmistakable sound of laughter. Just some other campers, man, probably doing the same thing we are. I answered with a laugh. Without warning, Todd shouted loudly to the people, "Got any more beer?" We all laughed and shushed him. We were having a blast and didn't think anything of it. Then we heard running. "What the hell, Todd, you pissed them off?" Amy started to panic a little. "Don't worry, Amy. They are probably drunk, just wanting to talk." Don comforted her, but you could see the worried look on his face as the footsteps got closer. My heart was beating out of my chest, thinking we were going to get into a drunken brawl. "Got any more beer?" sounded like a weird recording of Todd, only different. What the fuck? All of the hair on my arms stood on end. It really creeped me out. "Very funny assholes," Todd shouted. Then more running footsteps, only this time away from our campsite. Must be drunk teenagers messing with us. Amy breathed a sigh of relief. We all kind of nodded and agreed it was time for bed. That was kind of a buzzkill and I think creeped us out a little. "Hey, I'm sleeping in your tent, bud," Todd said, kind of with a nervous glance around the darkness. "Pussy." I said with a laugh, but was secretly happy not to have to rough it out alone. Once we all were in our tents, it was very quiet. It was the only time I can remember being kind of scared. I must have dozed off because I woke up to Todd shaking me. "Dude, listen," he whispered quietly. At first, there was nothing. Then I heard the most terrifying thing I've ever heard. It sounded right outside my tent, like a foot away. "I'm sleeping in your tent tonight, bud." Again, it sounded like Todd, only not like him. I was about to shit my pants. Todd looked at me in horror, and I must have had the same look on my face because I was petrified. Then we heard the running again, and whatever it was, it ran off again. "Let's hurry, get the fuck out of here," Don shouted to my surprise. They must have been listening to whatever it was too. We all jumped out of our tents and ran back to the van as quick as possible. I've never felt more relieved to be out of the woods. This was all last weekend and is 100% true. The worst part is Todd called me and said he's been hearing something outside his house at night. He wants me to come over tonight, but I'm honestly afraid too. Story number 3. I spent the night in a forest in Chernobyl with mutated animals. I found a mummified corpse holding a list of rules. The area where we were heading in Eastern Europe was known for its radioactivity. We had received reports of strange animals, things that looked like they were hatched from a mad scientist's laboratory. I didn't know how much of it I believed, because some of the descriptions the survivors gave sounded more like Wendigo and Dogman than any real animal. I figured that, in the heat of the moment and under attack, their minds had likely twisted the true form of the animals, horrifying as they were, into something truly nightmarish. There were 3 of us heading into the dark Eastern European forests. My friend Dimitri, who was originally from the country and knew the language, his girlfriend Anna, and myself. Everything seemed mundane enough as we flew into the country and handed over our passports. There was no sign of the horrors waiting ahead. The first towns we encountered looked idyllic enough as we drove through them in a rental car. Isolated farmhouses with cows and chickens dotted the landscape. Plentiful fields of wheat, potatoes and corn stretched out on all sides of us. The black earth here was fertile, I knew, as we headed deeper into the radiation zone. However, the houses and farms all started to look abandoned and dilapidated, the fields barren and dead. "Christ on a cracker," I muttered, more to myself than to my friends. "This place looks like it suffered through the apocalypse." "It did," Dimitri said grimly. "A nuclear apocalypse. I feel like the biblical one is far more optimistic than the true apocalypse will be. In reality, there will be no rapture, no victory of light over darkness. If there is ever a World War III, every major city will be consumed by nuclear fire. It will throw buses and cars thousands of feet into the air, spilling out bodies onto the burning skies. Entire streets will collapse, trapping countless millions under the rubble. "That's a cheerful thought," Anna commented, her dark blue eyes staring out the window. I saw the reflection of white eyes skittering through the brush outside. Small animals that disappeared in front of the approaching roar of the engine. "How far is it?" I asked, feeling carsick and anxious. The winding roads here curved through countless hills. It reminded me of driving through parts of Northern California before, when I had reached out the window. Anna and Dimitri seemed unaffected, though I cursed my stomach, which was always turning traitorous towards me. "It's a while, man," Dimitri said. "This country is huge, probably another 3 or 4 hour drive, and then we have to start walking. Good thing we left before dawn," Anna said, stifling a yawn. She had a can of some cheap Russian Red Bull knockoff, some fluorescent green crap that smelled like chemicals, but she drank it as if it were the finest French wine. I gazed out at the dark forests that passed us on both sides, wondering what kind of sights lay ahead in this land of the damned. Story number 4. It was the last camping trip my school had, and it ruined my life. I was a big deal in those days, at least as much of a big deal as I could be in high school. I was the star of my school's football team. My girlfriend was the hottest girl in class, and I was driving a Ford Mustang Mach 1, 1969. One of the finest cars in the world, and it was all mine thanks to a scout checking me out at one of our football games. Big talks of a scholarship with my name on it. I didn't understand how much potential I had until my dad turned to me after talking to the scout with this excited glint in his eyes. That week, a black muscle car was parked in our driveway. My dad said it was mine. Times were different in the 70s. I got my license when I was 16. I knew some kids who got theirs when they were 15. Anyway, I was cruising through town all day that day with my father. One of my happiest memories. If anyone in the school didn't know my name by then, they all did when they heard the roar of that Mustang's engine when I arrived. Yeah. I was a bit of a douche in high school, but those who knew me also knew I was one of the nicest guys. My friend, Clint, said it was because I was very slow at times, which a lot of people found cute. I didn't care what they thought, as long as they knew I wasn't some thug. Despite my looks, I enjoyed having friends. Anyway, I tell you all of this because something big was going to happen. The entire class, about 50 17-year-old teenagers, were about to go on a camping trip. Tall trees, mountains, warm fields baking in the sun. Situated near a river was a large camp, with log cabins, a few fire pits, and even an outdoor cafeteria under a thatch roof. Not to mention the activities they had set up, even a classic obstacle course. Of course, it was a big deal. Even if we were almost technically adults, we still had that childish energy in us. We were thinking about swimming in the river, competitive camp games like tug-o-war, sneaking off after lights out with our girlfriends, and of course, impressing anyone somehow during that trip, whether it was winning a foot race, pull-up contest, or scoring in the bushes. We talked about all of this after the school announcement in the boys' locker room. "Nick, are you driving down there in the Mustang?" Clint asked me. "Of course," I said. "Sally and I are going together. So, mind if I hitch a ride with you guys?" Clint asked in a hushed tone, looking around at the other guys. "Forget it. There's no room. But you have 4 seats," Clint yelled. Everyone laughed. "Yeah, that's where our things go," I told him. "Put it in the trunk." I put my hand on top of his head and shook him around a little. "Then where would I put the beers?" I told him. There were a few cheers when the guys heard this. Speaking of which, I am collecting cash so my big bro can get a beer. Anyone interested in getting on this? Pay up. The more you give, the better the selection. Some paid up there, and some paid later. Some made orders and put a little extra in. You have to understand that our entertainment was very limited compared to today. The movies had it right, alcohol and sex were on our minds. Very little else, truth be told. We were very organized when it came to setting up a party, at least most of the time. "Well, if you're bringing beers, then I guess I can ride the bus for a few hours," Clint said, suddenly very amiable. "Still, next time, pal." Asterisk. I parked outside Clint's house and angrily set the handbrake in place. I watched him practically skip out of the house with a pack on his back. After putting his things in the back seat, Clint opened the passenger door and hopped into the Mustang. "Hit it, lover boy," he said. "Shut the hell up," I snapped. All he could do was laugh as we set off. "Hey, I'm sorry Sally got sick," Clint said, twisting the cap off a soda bottle. He was very careful with it after I glared at him. "Yeah, me too," I muttered. We listened to the radio in silence. I stopped at the gas station before heading to school. I needed to fill up the tank and a jerry can. Always good to have a little extra for long trips. Clint kept slapping his legs to the tune, like some anxious drummer who really needed to jam. He got really energetic when he had sugar. I was glad when we got out to confirm we were present and ready to follow. A few teachers weren't happy with me driving to camp, but when you have no real black marks on your record, your parents' permission, and the football coach heading the field trip, they really couldn't do anything. I was still more than a little frustrated. As we drove, I decided to break the silence by venting what was going through my head. Sally didn't seem sick when I talked with her the day before. I heard through the grapevine that her ex was also staying behind. Sally had a track record for choosing bad guys and cheating. She was one of those follow-your-heart type girls. I was prepared to give the trip a skip on that alone, but with a trunk full of alcohol that others paid for, I just felt obligated to go. My father also said something that bothered me. "Stand by her as long as she stands by you," he began. "And when you have nobody to stand by your values, no matter how much it hurts." I'd have happily taken lies and unfounded guarantees over some be the bigger man wisdom. "Do you think she would cheat on you?" Clint asked as I told him this. "I don't know. I'm not special," I said. "I'm not her first. I'm not Dash." "Ah, don't start with that bull," Clint said, easing back into his seat. He really knew how to make himself comfortable. "If she screws up what she has with you, she's an idiot. You'd be better off without her. But she sure as hell wouldn't be better off without you. I'd still be the idiot who trusted her. PFF. You've always been an idiot, Mr. Football Scholarship," Clint said. I thumped the side of his arm. "No offense. We all have our strengths. Anyway, your dad is right. You don't know if she is going to do anything, so try not to think about it. Whatever. And they might not look it, but those other girls are something else," Clint said. "Her loss is another's gain." "What girls?" Clint pointed to the school bus in front of us. The back window wasn't the cleanest, but I could see a group of girls at the back waving at us. Clint leaned forward and turned up the music as loud as it could get. The girls whooped and raised their arms, but then suddenly faced forwards before sitting down in their seats. "Bet you that was Miss Weaver that shouted at them," Clint said, turning the music down. "Crazy bitch should have been left behind." I spent the rest of the trip watching Clint and one girl at the back of the bus mime an entire conversation. Him saying things that made me laugh. If she could have heard him, she would have kicked his ass. Asterisk. We took a narrow, wavy road into camp. It wasn't too bad for the Mustang, but the bus struggled. At least somebody had thought ahead and cut back branches. I could see piles along the road and the flat stumps sticking out the trunks they had left behind. When we reached the spot, I parked the Mustang beside the bus. Clint and I grabbed our bags and joined the roll call. We were divided into different cabins. 2 girl cabins, 3 boy cabins. There certainly wasn't a shortage either, but I guess only some of them were prepared for us. After stowing our things, we were given a rundown of camp activities and the schedule they had set out for us. Looking back, I realize now that the whole camp thing was just to make the school look good, a photo opportunity to show off to parents, and get more enrollments. I wouldn't have cared even if they made it obvious. Looking at that schedule, I just noted the free time they gave us. Morning, midday, and evening, except for the 5th day, which was a stargazing astronomy lesson block. I used the first free slow to talk with the guys before we went to our assigned cabins. The plan was simple: get the booze in the evening, conceal it in our bags, and then hide it in the cabin. There were only a few teachers and a couple of hired instructors. There weren't any room checks. Nothing. These were lenient adults who wanted to enjoy their time there as much as we did. I wouldn't have been surprised if Coach Sykes brought his own booze. 1 or 2 from every cabin. Clint said, "Bring empty bags. We can't all go to the Mustang. People will definitely notice." "What time?" somebody asked. "Late, after midnight," I said. "We gotta make sure the teachers are asleep. So midnight is a good time." With the plan set, I was part of the 6 guys that would hike back up the bus and Mustang. I wasn't about to lend someone the keys to my car just so they could open the trunk. Besides, seeing as it was in my car, I would get in trouble anyway if things went to hell. Asterisk. "Stop crowding the window," I told the guys in my cabin. "We have to keep a lookout, Nick." One said, "If you're caught, we ain't getting out a drink the rest of the week." "Shut up," I said, sliding the window shut. "I will get the damn beer." Tensions were high. The first 2 nights of our stay were screwed. One of the girls, that first night, swore she saw something in the woods and screamed, which set the teachers off thinking there were wild animals. Big deal, right? It's the forest. There's bound to be a few animals. A fact that didn't keep her from screaming her head off. It was a big joke the next day, but she wasn't laughing. The night after that was screwed thanks to a pair of lovebirds who crossed by right in front of one of the teachers' cabins. Big mistake. For that one, Coach Sykes kicked in every door to the guys' cabins and lectured us on late-night walks in the forest. When I regrouped with the others outside the cabin, we walked deep into the forest before rounding out towards the car. We kept the distant lights of the camp in sight, just in case we lost our way. We were also far enough that we could talk on our walk. Got some news, guys, Clint said, grabbing one guy by the back of the neck, one of the lovebirds from the night before. Our buddy here got caught last night, Dash. Tell us something we don't know. One guy interrupted. Shut up. He got caught last night with his girl going for a stroll. What he failed to mention was that he wasn't going someplace with his girl. No, they were, in fact, returning from their little rendezvous, Clint said, followed by his best French laugh. Bullshit. Did he tell you that? No, this little bit of information came from Abigail who, get this, thanked him for a wonderful night, right outside the girls' cabin this morning. You heard? The lovebird said. 3 cheers for Stanley and Abigail tomorrow. Clint continued, patting Stanley's shoulder. For now, pay the stupid bastard back for almost costing us a great booze heist. Clint smacked the back of Stanley's head, followed by the rest of us who had a few soft hits in. With that matter settled, we cracked jokes and continued our climb up the hill. We soon found the familiar path that we took down to camp and stuck to that. It was slow going. You'd be surprised how dark it can get, and we weren't about to use flashlights. Luckily for us, the bus was easy to spot in the dark, so we stumbled over to it and approached the trunk of the Mustang. After unlocking the trunk, we started to pack our bags with the cans of beer. Why cans? One guy asked. Bottles make noise, I told him, although I have a brandy bottle here for Max who felt like being a little extra. Which cabin is Max in? Mine. Hand it here. Another said, taking it. Fucking brandy. Fucking brandy. We all repeated. Max always has to be special. Huh? Well, he better share. We're not going to be able to take everything. Clint said, that's fine. I said, we missed the first 2 nights, so it works out. I closed the trunk and locked it. We tightened our packs and prepared ourselves for the walk back. It was going to be a lot harder. Liquid tended to slosh about, making balance tough. It would take even longer. Unfortunately, going slow was no longer an option. Near the path we took, we saw a flashlight. It bobbed with the person's movement, and for a moment we just stared at it. Then the light turned to us. Silently, we all turned to the forest and ran, knowing that if we said anything, our voice might be recognized. We had to leap over a short fence the vehicles were parked in front of. I could tell that a few of us had tripped over it. I heard glass break and another utterance of fucking brandy before we took the tumble down. Loose leaves, tall grass, and twigs. I could tell we had entered the deeper forest when the grass thinned out and all I heard was the crunch of twigs and leaves. I didn't run for more than 10 seconds before I noticed how quiet it got. I focused on making distance. Running with that weight on my back didn't faze me much. I had been running with weights like that as part of my exercise routine. You need strong legs to play football. I started to veer to my left, knowing I needed to head back to the cabin. I was about to say the same to the others when I realized why it was so quiet. I didn't hear any other footsteps. The others must have separated, which was a smart move. It just seemed that I was the only one that ran so far before deciding to turn back to the cabin. I cursed when I realized that whoever was checking out the parking lot could go back to the cabins and make sure everyone was accounted for. If the others made it there before me, great, but how would they explain me and my pack missing? I kept running. A few minutes later, I saw the distant light of the camp. I slowed down to catch my breath and began creeping back to my cabin. If I moved too fast, someone might notice. Basic sneaking in the dark rules that everyone should know, which is why you never scan the darkness. You linger in spots to notice the small changes. Before I got close, I heard something, a repetitive beating sound, growing louder, a steady series of thumps and footfalls. Then all I heard was a growl as something collided with my side, knocking the window out of me. I could barely catch my breath before I felt this pressure on my back and a viscous pulling. All I heard was snarling, and that weight was making it difficult to get air back into my lungs. I heard fabric rip as my pack was torn open. I heard claws on the cans, but then something crunched. I felt something wet hit the back of my head, and then I heard the hiss of the beer spraying out of the can. The pressure lifted for a moment, but the snarling remained. It got closer to my ear. I could feel the breath hit the back of my neck. I could hear it sniffing and growling soon after, just as it did before it bit into one of the beer cans. Like a flashlight beam crossed through the trees, hitting me before going somewhere else. The pressure lifted off my body and I heard something running. I rolled over quickly to see something moving between the trees. It was massive, a dog-like creature that bounded from tree to tree before sprinting off into the darkness. I stayed still in the shadow of the tree. I heard the footsteps of someone, whoever they were. They stopped just before my tree. The flashlight scanned back and forth over the forest before they turned around and walked back to camp. I steadied my breathing again when I thought they were out of earshot. The feeling of panic took a lot longer to settle. When I thought it was safe, I got everything together and made my way to the cabin. I took my time not just to be careful, but because I kept looking back. I reached up and knocked on the window. It slid open. Hands stretched out to take the pack, and then they helped me inside the cabin. In the dark, I got plenty of pats on the back. I was the last one, but no alarms were raised. Mission successful. "What happened to your pack?" someone asked. "Did you catch it on something?" "Looks like he already started. 2 cans are missing," another said. The mood was too good and I was too disoriented to tell them anything. I decided not to say anything, but I was grateful it was dark. I didn't want them to see my face. Asterisk. That night was a mini party, as was the 4th night of our camping trip. Some booze slipped into one of the girls' cabins, but I wasn't complaining. I just tried to relax as best as I could after that. Being the camp hero, I had plenty of beer to help with that, but otherwise, we were all fairly calm and quiet. On the 5th day, Clint shouldered me. "One of the cabins has gone dry," he said. "Max's one. I guess he needed the stronger stuff to keep him from overdoing it." "Too bad," I said. "I'm not going to get more. Screw Max." "Yeah, my thoughts exactly." Clint nodded. "Besides, it's the last night. No chance of slipping past the teachers tonight, especially Coach Sykes." "What do you mean?" "Stargazing tonight," Clint said. "Remember, we're going for a night hike to the clearing to get a good look. Maybe I can smuggle some of my dash." I stopped listening to him. I was busy thinking up excuses. Asterisk. The best excuse I could come up with was food poisoning. Not the blow chunks into the toilet, but the painful, stomach imploding kind that made it difficult to go on hikes in the dark. Coach Sykes immediately saw it as his best football player needing some rest and recovery, so gave me a few pills and told me to hit the sack. Miss Weaver, however, would stay behind and keep an eye on things. She didn't want to leave one student behind in the camp while everyone went off on the hike. I think she was going to stay behind anyway. She was a little too old for it all as well. I didn't care. I just holed up in my cabin and breathed a sigh of relief. I saw her make the rounds, walking mostly between the cafeteria and the female teacher's cabin. I see her stop at some point to look out towards the river and the mountain behind it, smoking a cigarette. I couldn't really see her figure, but I could see the glow of the cigarette tip now and then. I joined her with my relaxation ritual. A few cans of beer were close by. I thought about the trip back home. Clint would be riding shotgun. I knew that much, but I wondered if the extra fuel from the jerry can would be enough. I tried recalling a gas station along the way. I crushed a beer can into a flat disc and added it to the rest. We would get rid of all of them in one shot. Couldn't leave any easy-to-spot Kens lying around. With these mundane thoughts circling my mind, I decided that I was preoccupied, as well as liquored up. Enough. It was time to get some sleep. I went to bed and waited for sleep to take me. I then heard the footsteps of someone walking outside. Looking up to glance through the gap in the curtains, I saw the familiar glow of a cigarette. I was about to lower my head when the shape shifted and a second glow appeared, to fiery sparks in the darkness that weaved from side to side. I didn't quite understand what I was looking at. That's when the figure left the darkness, so painfully slow, creeping, not too different from the way I did when I approached the cabin after grabbing the booze. As the cool light of the night hit the body, the shape confused me more. First, I saw an arm, but it was dark and misshapen. The fingers weren't that long. The legs themselves appeared crouched, yet the figure was tall. As it stepped fully into view, I saw that the misshapen parts of its body were merely clumps of hair that seemed to stand among its already hairy form. The fingers weren't long for its size, but its claws made up for it. The eyes lost their red tinge, becoming black beads that caught the light. But even the darkness seemed to dim that glint. It was a monster, a wolf-like creature standing on its back legs, its body an ugly, demonic mix between man and dog. Yet, its face was that of a hound with white teeth, gnarled, as I could see a few poking out from beneath its black lips. As it approached, it must have seen me. It must have seen me see it. Why else did it walk so slowly? Yet, why did its eyes follow mine? Maybe it knew I saw it and just didn't care. It knew that there wouldn't be any interruptions this time. It knew I was alone, if it could smile cruelly. I felt it did just before it dropped to all fours and ran towards the cabin. I was helpless, despite my size, despite my strength. I couldn't do anything. I saw the glass shatter as if it weren't really there. A window to me, a bothersome cobweb to it. Darkness filled my vision, and in that darkness, its eyes became like fire once again. I saw teeth. I felt claws dig into my skin. I remember grabbing a bed frame. I felt teeth sink into my left leg. It hurt, but I felt true pain when the teeth reached my bone and I could feel the crunch, the grating of bone on bone. I was screaming all the time, but I knew that help wouldn't reach me in that second. The creature tried to pull me out the window. It got my leg hung over the window, started to tug at my leg. I heard nothing but ringing and my heart pounding. I dropped to the floor of the cabin, but I didn't feel it. I stared at the broken window and the wet blood gleaming on the windowsill. I raised my eyes to look at the sky and then I passed out. Asterisk. I woke up in an ambulance. I think. The sun was up. A beam of light gleamed through the windshield and straight into my eyes. With the light in my eyes, everything looked dark, highlighted with gold. "He's awake," a guy behind me said. "Thank God," the driver said. "I will let Aurora know." "Hey, kid, how are you feeling?" the man behind me asked. Before I could answer, he continued speaking. "If you feel a little weird right now, that's just the drugs taking effect. If you want to rest, you can. We will dash." I didn't have much choice. I could feel my eyes roll back and then my head drop. I was out again. Asterisk. The next time I woke up was 2 days later post-surgery. I woke up with family around me. There is a certain kind of sadness that still tears me up inside when people look at me. Yet, it doesn't hurt as much as the expressions my family wore as they sat by my hospital bed. My father especially. My leg had been amputated, at least, partially. A lot of it was already missing, according to my family. The doctor explained the rest to me alone. I will spare you gory details, but tried to save as much as they could in surgery. But it wasn't going to happen. Looking down at my left leg was surreal. I just couldn't believe it. Maybe my mind was just preoccupied with something else. I received flowers from Sally, but she never showed up. Turned out my bad feelings about her were founded. She just felt guilty enough to make an empty gesture. When Clint told me that little bit of news, it was like a drop in the ocean. I told him to forget it when he suggested a little revenge. I just didn't care. And sure, Losing my leg was life-changing. I didn't get my football scholarship gone, but the university I was speaking to did give us a sort of half-scholarship thing. It meant I needed better grades, and my parents had to pay more than they would, but still less than the full price. I will never know what I could have become. What I am now is nothing more than a glorified manager at a car dealership. I spend most of my days at a desk, just getting on with life, and it's not bad. But like said, I get those looks, and those who knew me can't help but look a certain way when they see me. Even as I look at my leg now, my thoughts aren't filled with what could have been, even though there is plenty of that at times. All I think about is that creature, that man-dog thing, changed everything inside my head. It ruined my life, the life I could have, but it also broke something inside me, took something inside of me, because I hear it. I hear it every time I am close to falling asleep. My heart aches with fear. I feel powerless all over again. I know it isn't in my city, let alone outside my window, but I still check, every single night. Story number 5. My life was saved by a Dogman hunter. I was heading back into town with my buddy Joe, after spending the weekend out on a frozen lake, ice fishing and drinking beer. The fish were really biting, too. Joe's SUV was stuffed to the gills with walleye and smallmouth bass. The northerly town of Kapuskasing was buried under a mountain of snow, the worst snowfall since the winter of '97. I've lived my entire life in northern Ontario, so I've seen my fair share of snow, but nothing like this. But you learn to expect the unexpected in northern Ontario. We were heading over a steep incline, enjoying a generous backdrop of pine trees painted in freshly fallen snow, when tragedy struck. We watched as 2 police helicopters landed on the small slice of highway, causing the trickles of traffic to grind to a halt. Not a good sign. This highway was the only road home. We later learned that a newlywed couple had collided with a transport truck, killing both the husband and wife. We were forced to turn around and head back over the hill, where we found ourselves driving through a modest-sized hamlet consisting of 1 stop sign, a gas station / motel / restaurant, plus a smattering of wartime houses. Except, all you could see was the pointed rooftops. The houses were completely submerged in snow. It was an incredible sight, something you only see this far up north. And even then, this was rare. Joe didn't want to stick around, waiting a good 12 hours for the road to clear. He had a wife and kids to get home to, so we pulled over, wondering what our next move should be. Joe had that look in his eye, the look he gets when he's about to do something dangerous or stupid, or both. I know this look well. Hand tight, he said, and hold on. We turned onto a crude version of a road, the kind designated for snowmobiles, with stop signs standing a mere 3 feet tall. The road was extremely narrow. Snowbanks as high as trees were towering over us like large, looming walls of white. If anything were to approach, we'd have nowhere to go. There wasn't enough room to turn around. I was becoming increasingly uneasy. This is how people get hurt, or worse. Are you sure this is safe? I asked, hating the sound of my voice. Joe ignored me, or simply didn't hear me. He was busy white-knuckling the minivan through the snow tunnel trail, the glare of the setting sun blinding us the entire time. We drove for 15 minutes, knifing our way along the icy road, which was bumpier than a wooden roller coaster. It was obvious that we shouldn't be here. The impending darkness didn't improve my mood one bit, either. I had a bad feeling about this. Joe stopped the van. "What's up?" I asked, not trusting the look on his face. Joe didn't answer. I could see his mind at work, assessing the direness of our situation. "I've got to turn this thing around somehow," he finally said. I couldn't see how this was possible, as we were sandwiched between 2 colossal snowbanks. Something flickered inside Joe's dark eyes. "What's that up ahead?" he asked, flashing on the high beams. "I think it's a road." It was. We edged a bit further, stopping at this makeshift road. There were no signs or road markings to be seen. Nothing. In fact, this road looked worse than the one we were on. "Let's see where it goes," Joe said, cranking the wheel. As the minivan lumbered down the unmarked road, an ominous feeling swept over me. It was impossible to ignore. We were in trouble. There was no denying it. We were completely off the grid. Not even Google Maps could save us. There was only one way to go, straight. The road was leading us into the dark of the forest. And when you're this far north, that's never a good idea, especially at night. That's when the wolves come out. It was looking to be a moonless night, which didn't help us one bit. Joe's hands were quivering as he clenched the wheel, keeping us from skidding into the towering snowbank. He kept assuring me we'd be all right, but I've heard that one before. Joe slammed on the brakes. "You see that?" He pointed. "Over there." I squinted my eyes. "Look," he said. "Fire." Deep into the forest, I spotted a small, flickering flame, dancing blue and orange and yellow and wild. Probably a campfire. Just then, a strange and disturbing sound crackled through the night like a howling wolf. "You hear that?" he asked. The animal cried out again. It was the loneliest yowl I'd ever heard. There it goes again. It sounded like a wolf, except it didn't sound like any wolf I'd heard before. And I've heard plenty. Whatever it was dangerously close. "Wolf," I said nervously, but not believing it. As soon as those words left my mouth, a pair of glowing red eyes appeared out of nowhere. Joe stopped the car and killed the lights. "Be still," he said. I did just that. I sat motionless beside him in the car, but my hands were shaking. Those laser red eyes were approaching at an impossible speed. "Reach back and grab the gun," Joe whispered. I tried, but it was out of reach. They were on his side, closer to the back. Those glowing eyes flashed on and off, and for a moment everything was still. Then from out of nowhere, the beast lunged onto the hood of the van. H! We screamed in unison. The thing was huge, unlike any animal I'd ever seen. It looked like an overgrown German shepherd, except it was standing on its hind legs. Like a human, it was snarling at us, making ungodly noises, thrashing about. The creature was long and gangly, frothing at the mouth, clearly rabid. "Dogman," Joe said, clearly astonished. "I don't believe it." Joe gunned it, looking to run the thing over and speed away, but the wheels were caught on ice. Without warning, the beast leapt off the hood and started scratching at my door, its claws like daggers, tearing the door from its hinges. It smashed through the windshield, shattering it into a million pieces, with its dog-like face twisted in rage. The thing took a swipe at me, its long, toothy claws just inches from ripping my eyeballs from their sockets. The SUV shook, spilling the cooler of dead fish. The smell was atrocious. The Dogman disagreed. Before it could rip apart my throat with its curvy claws, the creature turned from me and trampled to the back of the van, where it devouring the fish in seconds flat. Its muzzle turned blood red. Watching it lick the fish guts from its paws was sickening. This isn't how I wanted to die. The Dogman's razor-sharp teeth were on full display. The insidious brute seemed hell-bent on killing us both. We were, in fact, the main course, took a tentative step toward us, licking its filthy face. I gave Joe a look that said, "Nice knowing you, pal," when out of nowhere came an ear-ringing blast, striking the creature in the shoulder. The thing screamed in protest. Then came another shot, hitting the beast square in the chest. Blood and gore spilled like wine across the interior of the SUV. "Someone's shooting at it," Joe proclaimed. 3 more shots rang out. The creature snarled, wiped the fleshy cartilage from its bloodied face, then attacked. Bang! The shot went wide, but it was enough to send the beast scurrying back into the woods. "Holy hell," Joe said, in a shaky voice, without a second thought. He pulled his seat back as far as it could go, then shimmied his way into the back of the van and grabbed the gun. "We're gonna need this." All of a sudden, it was freezing, with the vehicle off and the windshield busted in. It was an igloo inside the van. "It's getting cold in here," I said, shaking uncontrollably. A large plume of steam escaped from my face as I spoke. I was in shock. I had no idea what that thing was, but it damn near killed me. The scene inside of the minivan was that out of a horror movie. The smell was even worse. I tried opening the door, but it wouldn't budge. Joe tried his door with the same results. We were stuck. I'd sliced myself to shreds before I got halfway through my windshield. Joe's door had a bullet hole where the handle should be. We'd have to escape through the back. Blood and guts and fish bones and all. It was gruesome, but we did it. Once outside, I scanned the area, searching for that dog creature that almost killed me, but it had vanished. Joe's shotgun was aimed at a speck of light approaching from straight ahead. A car. Within minutes, we were greeted by a Volkswagen microbus. It stopped directly in front of us. The driver got out and ran toward us carrying a sniper rifle. Wearing a belt of ammunition, he spoke fast and with purpose, checking his surrounding while doing so. You saw it? You did, didn't you? Excellent. Which way to go? By the way, this guy made Clint Eastwood look like a Boy Scout. I honestly thought he was going to kill us. He frowned as he surveyed the scene. Then he shrugged. I suppose you'll be needing my help. He ran to the bus and opened up the hatch, exposing an array of military-style weapons to the likes I'd only seen in the movies. Holy hell, Joe said, clearly impressed. I remained quiet, unsure what to make of this heavily armed, red-headed stranger who literally just appeared out of nowhere to save our lives. But there seemed to be no other choice. Whoever he was, he drove us back to his cottage, regaling us with the history of this Dogman creature. He told us some pretty tall tales. His name was Patrick. Apparently, he's a Dogman hunter. He says he's never captured one, but claims to have seen 4 or 5, wounding 2 of them. Pesky bastards, he says. Hard to kill. He'd been hunting the one that attacked us for weeks. Apparently, he's been mutilating deer and coyotes, as well as regular cats and dogs all winter long, leaving their salvaged remains scattered along the sides of the road and in people's backyards. The locals were starting to panic. Joe and I texted home. Then we stayed up all night talking about Dogman. I was having a hard time coming to grips with all this, seeing as how I almost died at the hands of one of them. Joe, on the other hand, was enthralled. The next day, we drove back to the SUV to inspect the damage. When we arrived, the van was completely dismantled and destroyed. It lay in ruins. Everything inside it had been ravaged and plundered. This isn't right, Patrick said. There must be an explanation. We scanned the surrounding area for over an hour and came up empty-handed. A fresh blanket of snow had fallen overnight, making track finding next to impossible. The disappointment on Patrick's face was palpable. Reluctantly, we hopped into his microbus and he drove us home with our tails between our legs, where we arrived a day late and short one SUV. We stayed in touch with Patrick going forward. Joe, coming from a long lineage of seasoned hunters, was intrigued by this Dogman creature. Naturally, I was skeptical. I'm fairly certain that beast meant to eat me. The last thing I wanted to do was volunteer to go searching for it. Yet, unbeknownst to me, this was the making of a team of hunters, Dogman hunters. Still, amidst all the excitement, a feeling of trepidation had stolen over me. There was lesson to be learned from all of this, a lesson lost on my gun-toting counterparts. Some roads are best untraveled, especially in northern Ontario, where anything can happen, and usually does. Story number 6. The Dogman of Vegreville. I was 6 years old when I saw the Dogman of Vegreville, and I will never, ever forget it. It was on a cool Thursday night in May of 1995. Mom had told me to go to bed, but I wasn't tired yet. I'd snuck my Game Boy under the covers and was playing Mario with the volume off, thinking that I was oh so clever. Mom was probably already in bed and Dad was working late, so he wouldn't be in to check on me anytime soon. I knew I could play to my heart's content and I intended to do just that. My fingers moved clumsily over the buttons as I sent Mario to his death over and over again. I wasn't very good at the game, but it didn't matter. I loved it anyway. I didn't look up from the screen until I heard the distant pop of what sounded like fireworks. I remember that I'd peeked out of the covers. There was no flash of light outside my window, and while it was a beautiful night, there wasn't really any occasion to let off fireworks. All the same, I could still hear those frantic pops, one after the other. Bang, 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 bang. I'd never heard a gun go off before. In movies and on TV, yes, but never in real life. I'd never thought it would sound so much like fireworks. I set my Game Boy down to go and look out the window, half hoping to catch a glimpse of the show I thought was out there. As I looked out into the darkness, though, I saw nothing. Those fireworks had been very close by. I knew that much, but I couldn't see anyone who could have set them off. My house was in a small suburb that backed onto the woods, and my window faced the next-door neighbor's yard. I could see the lights on in their house, but nothing else. No one was in the yard. I noticed that the door to the back porch was open. No, not open. Shattered. Something had forced its way in, although I didn't quite connect the dots at the time. Then I heard a scream, the terrified cry of a frightened woman that was cut off abruptly. That too was close by, and I could tell exactly where that was coming from. It had come from the neighbor's house. I stared at the house, trying to understand just what was going on. There were no other sounds. No other screams, just a pregnant silence. Outside my bedroom, I could hear my mom moving around. She must have heard the same things I had, and I could hear as she raced downstairs to investigate the commotion for herself. She hadn't even made it to the front door when I saw something emerge from the back of the next-door neighbor's house. It loped through the broken porch door, a scrawny, hairy thing that looked like no animal I'd ever seen before. I could see its pointed ears twitching on its head, and its pointed wolfish snout. Its limbs seemed too long. It seemed to limp as if it was in pain, no doubt from the gunshot wounds it had suffered. Its head turned to look at me, and I saw two golden eyes shining in the darkness. They looked upwards and into my window where I stared back at it. Whatever that creature was, it looked at me, saw me. For a moment, our eyes remained locked. Time felt as if it stood still, even from a distance. I know I saw something in its stare or in its face, but at the time, I couldn't put my finger on it. It was the creature that broke eye contact. It shook its head and shuffled away. Without ceremony, it took off into the woods. The darkness amongst the trees quickly swallowed it whole, and I lost sight of it. One moment it was there. The next it was gone. What happened next is a blur. I don't have any other clear memories from that night, nor do I remember much about what followed. I'm sure my mom did what she could to shelter me from it. I still found out the details anyways, because that's what happens in small towns. People talk and kids listen. While I may not remember what happened after my mom discovered the corpses of Nicholas and Ashley Burr, it was the talk of the town at the time, and every now and then, some people still whisper about it. Vegreville, British Columbia is a small town with a population that barely tops 3,000 people. Gruesome murders aren't exactly common here, and so when one happens, you'd better believe that people are going to remember it. According to the rumors, some sort of animal broke into the Burr household that night. Most people claim it was a bear, but I've heard some people insist it was a puma. Either way, it woke up Nicholas Burr, and he took down his hunting rifle to kill it. He found it in his kitchen and shot it about 6 times before it attacked him, and it damn near ripped him in half. Ashley Burr was found upstairs. The creature had gone after her next and ripped her pretty little head clean off her shoulders and crushed it to a pulp. It was shortly afterwards that it ran off. Supposedly, the commotion from concerned neighbors investigating the gunshot and Ashley's final scream spooked it, and it retreated off into the woods. Nobody actually got a good look at it. Nobody but me. Over time, I've taken to calling the creature the Dogman of Vegreville. Of course, nobody else in town ever actually believed I really saw what I saw. They all took my words as proof that it was a bear, and as I grew up, I learned that it was best not to talk about it. It's easy to forgive a child for claiming he saw something unnatural, but as one ages, that becomes a much less forgivable offense. I never once believed that I'd actually seen a bear that night though. As I said before, I remember very clearly what I saw. I've seen it in my nightmares for 25 years now, and it sure as hell wasn't a bear. But like I said, I keep that to myself. I'm a grown man now, and I've got other concerns to worry about. I've got rent to pay, a job at the local auto shop to keep, and I've got my mom to take care of. A few months after the Burr incident, my dad's car broke down on the side of a highway while he was on his way home from work one night. He must have been trying to flag down a passing car for help, although the poor bastard whose attention he got didn't notice him until after he'd felt the bump of his body beneath his tires. Dad died instantly, and my mom was never quite the same afterwards. Grief leaves scars on a person that never fully heal, and I had to learn to step up as the man of the house pretty damn quickly after that. I don't believe I've mentioned the Dogman of Vegreville to my mom in a long while. She's got enough on her plate without hearing about my little side project. As age creeps up on her, her health has begun to fail even more. I haven't felt comfortable leaving her by herself. Sickness has left her unable to work, so I handle the bills. She does some of the cooking, but that's really just about it. I'd hate to push her too hard, especially when she's in such a frail state. A few months back, she had her second stroke, and it's been a slow recovery process ever since. I do what I can for her. I really do. But no matter how much I want to, I can't fix her. I can't take away the things that are eating her away. And bringing up my research into a local cryptid that I tied to what I know to have been a traumatic incident to her wouldn't do her any favors. It's best left off the table with her. But just because I don't discuss it doesn't mean I haven't put the work in. As I've said, I know what I saw that night, and I've been aiming to prove it for some time now. Throughout the years, I researched other attacks in the area. Vegreville only had the one, but I found reports of similar incidents in the surrounding towns. There were a few of them in the late 80s and early 90s. The attacks all played out similarly enough. Some unknown animal, suspected to be a bear or puma, forced entry into a house and butchered the occupants. Tragic as it was, it got chalked up to a simple animal attack, and that was it. You don't often hear of animals forcing entry into houses. Sure, if you look online, you'll find funny videos of bears breaking open cabin doors and poking around looking for food. However, those cabins aren't occupied when it happens. I've seen my fair share of bears. They aren't keen on people and generally avoid them when at all possible. Vegreville is a pretty remote place, but it's still far too heavily populated for most bears to want to get too close. Sometimes you might hear about them rummaging through trash or poking around people's yards. I'm sure there have even been a few instances where curious bears broke into houses, looking for food. Attacks are rare, however, and when they do happen, they generally involve cubs. People don't care about that, though. There's an image of the bear as this demon of the forest, a violent monster who loves nothing more than to rip into fresh meat. People assume that just because they have the ability to easily kill a person, then they are inclined to do so. Supposedly, 3 bears were killed in response to the attacks. One in '88, another in '92, and one in '96. The one that died in '96 was a large female grizzly who had attacked a pair of hikers in the next county over. Since the attacks seemed to stop after that, people figured that was the end of it, and I've got to admit, part of me wondered if that really was the case for the longest time. But then the attacks started up again. I saw them on local news stations. The same story as before. Forced entry into a house and the total slaughter of its occupants. I knew it was that same creature. I could feel it in my bones, and I knew this was my one shot at proving what I'd seen all those years ago. I had no intention of wasting it. The most recent attack occurred in a town called Weston, a few kilometers north of Vegreville. I'd heard about it in the paper, and the next day, I figured I might as well head up to investigate. At worst, I'd waste a day in another town. At best, maybe I might find myself one step closer to understanding just what it was I saw that night. What I knew going in was that Elsa and Janelle Harris were sisters. Janelle was blind, and Elsa took care of her. One night, something had attacked Elsa while she was in her backyard. Janelle had heard the attack, along with the neighbors, and had gone to the door to call for her. Instead, she'd attracted the attention of whatever animal had killed her sister, and it had dragged her off into the woods. Police had found most of her body the next day. Most of it. The Harris house was in a quiet neighborhood just like my own. I could see the forest behind the houses though. The map said that it wasn't a particularly large stretch of woods. It was little more than a ravine with a small creek that separated the houses from a nearby park. However, it connected with a larger area of the woods. It made for a perfect little place for man and nature to intersect. The house itself was still sectioned off with police tape. I didn't see anyone to stop me from going inside, but I didn't want to push my luck either. Why try it, right? I parked my car across the street and got out. Even if I wasn't going to go inside the house, maybe there were still clues to be found. The houses in that area didn't have fences. Weston was still fairly rural, all things considered. I could get into the backyard easily enough. The vast forest started at the end of the yard and stretched infinitely deep into it. As I walked past the trees, I was quickly swallowed up by the darkness of the canopy. Just what I was expecting to find. I really can't say. I kept my eyes on the dirt in front of me as I circled around to the backyard. Through the trees, I could see the yellow police tape, isolating the crime scene that was formerly the Harris's backyard. I didn't go too deep into the woods. It was better not to wander out too deep, or else I'd probably have trouble finding my way back. The area around me was oddly quiet. I could hear a few distant birds and some trickling water, but not much else. Slowly, I approached the water, a small creek that ran over some smooth rocks. I didn't cross the creek. No need to go that far, but I stayed on the edge of it and looked out at the space around me. If the Dogman really was the one responsible for this, it would no doubt be long gone. I suppose that was a good thing. I had no interest in meeting that thing face to face. As I stood by the creek, my eyes shifted downwards. I'd been half hoping to see something. A footprint, a bit of fur, hell, maybe even some evidence that Janelle Harris had been dragged that way. I suppose that was my lucky day then. It was faint and easy to miss or mistake for something else. What I say was barely evidence, and yet I saw it all the same. The soil around the creek was wet and muddy. One small segment had grooves in it that indicated something had been dragged that way. A few stones were overturned and had been pulled out of the creek. I paused at the sight of them before I noticed what was right beside those drag marks. Paw print. There was only one. It had landed in the right place at the right time and sank deep into the drying mud. It wasn't even a complete paw print. Just a few canine pads that looked only slightly larger than my hand, and yet looking at them gave me pause. I crouched down by the stream, wide-eyed as I studied the indentation in the mud. This was the closest thing I'd gotten to proof since that night 25 years ago, and I immediately took out my phone to grab a picture. "You lost, sir," a voice said from behind me as soon as the shutter snapped, and I looked back. A man stood a few feet away from me. He was older, somewhere in his 50s and dressed in flannel. "No," I said hastily as I stood up. "Sorry, I was just looking at some tracks." He studied me for a moment before nodding. "You with the police?" he asked. "Not exactly," I replied. "Just doing some research, something of a hobby. What happened to the Harris girls? It's really tragic, but it reminds me a bit of some attacks that happened about 25 years back. I was just wondering if maybe there was a connection or something." "A connection?" the other man asked before scoffing. "That your car on the street. By the by, the red Corolla." "Yeah, that's mine," I said. "You must be new in town then. You living in this area?" "Excuse me, I saw your car the other day. It was your car, right?" His brow furrowed. "I don't think so," I said. "I've never been out here before. I'm just here to look into the killings." The man raised an eyebrow. "That's all." "Huh? My mistake then. You said you found tracks." I nodded before stepping aside to show them to my new companion. He kept his distance from me as he drew nearer and looked down at the indents in the mud. He studied them for a moment before looking back at me. "Well, that's interesting. I don't suppose you heard what the police had to say on what happened here. Did you? Bear attack, right?" I asked. He nodded. "They did indeed. You mentioned other attacks in this area. 20, 30 years back. Didn't you? I remember those. I suppose this does fit the bill. You ever hear of a man named Tyler Fox? The name wasn't familiar. No, sir, I replied. Well, I was barely even your age when those attacks happened last, so my memory isn't great. If I recall, folks chalked that up to a bear as well. Fox had some other ideas, though. I remember he was working with the police, taking pictures of prints. If I remember, those prints looked a lot like this. If you snapped any pictures, it might be smart to bring them to him. Chances are he might know something. I looked down at the paw prints once more before looking back at the man. Tyler Fox, you said? I felt something brimming in my chest. Hope or elation, perhaps. If there was evidence from the attacks 25 years ago, maybe it would tell me more about what had been out there back then. Maybe it would tell me more about what was out there now. Where would I find him exactly? I asked, and I barely hid the excitement in my voice as I did. The neighbor gave me an address about 15 minutes away and a phone number to call. Tyler Fox picked up on the second ring, and when I told him I'd found some footprints, he seemed pretty eager to meet. His chosen meeting place was a small diner out on the edge of town. A little greasy spoon, the likes of which you'd probably find just about anywhere, and either served the worst food in the world or the best. No in between. Fox was a man who was right on the edge of 60, with frazzled gray hair and serious eyes behind big studious glasses. He was waiting for me when I arrived, and I could see his impatience in the way he anxiously drummed his fingers. "Mr. Fox?" I asked timidly. His gaze locked onto me so fast I was sure he was about to attack. "Yes, that would be me," he said hastily. "You're the one who called about the paw prints, right? Out behind the Harris house." "Yes, sir. I found them just this morning." "Well, sit down. Sit. Let me buy you a drink. I assume you've got the pictures." "Right here, sir." I offered him my phone, and he snatched it out of my hand to study the pictures on the screen. He was silent for a few moments, and a waitress happened by to ask us for our drink orders. Fox had a beer. I opted for soda. A man I spoke to, one of the Harris sisters' neighbors, mentioned you'd looked into the attacks a few years back. I said once the waitress was out of earshot. "You had some ideas as to what might be causing them?" "I did," Fox said, his voice distant. He was barely listening to me. After a moment, he set my phone on the table and pushed it back towards me. The cops back then were quick to chalk the attacks up to a bear. Could be that they were right, although I always thought the tracks looked off. "Well, those tracks in the picture. I'm no expert, but I don't think those were bear tracks." "They could be," he said. "The two main theories I've heard floated around are either bears or wolves were responsible for the attacks. Bears have 5 digits on their paws, just like the tracks you showed me, and the size looks just about right. However, if that is a bear, I'll be very surprised." "Why is that?" I asked. "The palm of the tracks. They've got the right amount of digits, but the palm is too wide, like a man's palm." He raised one hand and curled his fingers inwards a little bit to make a claw. "Only much bigger. You say you found this out behind the Harris house, right? You swear it?" Yeah. "I swear it," I said. Fox huffed. I didn't know if he believed me or not. "These look exactly like the tracks I found a few years back. Exactly, off the top of my head. I'd say this was the same animal. As for what exactly that animal is, well, hell if I know. I take it you're looking into all this. If you were poking around the Harris house." I hesitated for a moment before nodding. "That's right." "Well, good luck to you. I dug through this shit all those years ago. I never figured out what was really behind those attacks. If you're digging into this, I can send you some of my old photographs and whatnot. I'm a little too old to be trudging about the woods these days, but it might be there's something in there that can help you." "Please," I said. "I could pick them up today if you're offering." "Eager, huh? If you insist. Can't say I have much better to do," Fox said with a shrug. He took a long sip of his beer. "I'll buy you lunch first, though. Hell, least I can do for the kid who's taking up the torch, right?" "I'd appreciate that, Mr. Fox." "Yeah, you'd better." He chuckled humorlessly before taking another sip. "What do you suppose it is?" I asked. "I know you said you didn't know for sure, but I don't know. What do you think is out there? Like I said, hell if I know. He repeated. If I had to guess, subspecies of something. Bear, wolf, I don't know. The woods out here are thick and deep. I've heard people talk of Sasquatch, monsters, demons, and all sorts of strange things. I've never fully bought into all of it. I always figured there was a rational explanation, and that's honestly the best I can come up with. He shrugged. For all I know, it really is Bigfoot out there. Either way, it's killing those people, and clearly it's back. The waitress who'd brought us our drinks returned with a friendly smile and a charming greeting of, "Have you boys decided what you'd like to eat?" "Yeah, I'll go with the Salisbury steak," Fox said without even looking at the menu, and the waitress looked expectantly at me. I hadn't had a chance to go through the menu either, and with the way her eyes lit up with recognition, I didn't get a chance either. "Oh, it's you," she said, half surprised and half relieved. She said it as if we'd met before, although I was sure I'd never seen that woman before in my life. "You look a lot better today, don't you?" "Excuse me?" I asked. "Oh, don't you remember? You were pretty out of it. It was, a few days back? You were on the side of the road. We gave you a ride." I stared at her, unsure just what the hell she was saying, and yet her smile held a sincerity to it that was difficult to argue. "You don't remember?" she repeated. "Sorry, ma'am. I'm afraid you have the wrong person," I said quietly. Fox was looking at me expectantly. One eyebrow raised, and I saw a dejected look across the waitress's face. She was probably wondering if she'd either really got it wrong, or if I was trying to save face and she'd embarrassed me. "Oh, well, maybe I do," she said quietly. "I'm sorry. That must have been my mistake. Sorry about that." "No worries," I assured her and forced an uncomfortable smile. "I guess I've just got one of those faces." "I guess you do," she repeated, trailing off slightly before taking a step back. She offered a sheepish smile and left without even taking my order. Another waitress conveniently came along to take it after I'd had a chance to look at the menu. Fox never asked me about what she'd said. I suppose he took it at face value and opted to stay out of it either way. I was grateful for that much. When I left Weston, I had an old box filled with old photographs of paw prints in mud. Fox had been generous in what he'd given me, and I couldn't get home to pore over it all fast enough. I'd stumbled upon the motherlode of Dogman evidence. Not enough to truly convince anyone. No, it would take a hell of a lot of proof to ever really be enough. But it was enough for me. I faked sick and took the next day off work just to pore over the photographs and files. Fox had just about everything, including detailed reports of every suspected encounter with whatever creature he thought was behind this. In a 100-kilometer radius of Vegreville, I counted about 12 different supposed attacks from 1990 to 1996, including the Burr family. There were photographs and even one or two plasters of footprints taken from the scene, but not much in regards to eyewitnesses. Nobody had clearly seen what had attacked those people, and the best information I could find was people describing it as an animal fleeing the scene. It was more information than I'd ever had access to, but nothing definitive. At least the pictures of the prints were enough for me to compare to the pictures I'd taken. Fox had been right when he'd said they'd been similar. However, looking at them side by side, I couldn't help but feel as if the one I'd found was smaller than the one Fox had photographed. I supposed it made some sense. After all, after so many years, it probably wasn't the exact same creature, right? This one could be a juvenile, maybe even the offspring of whatever had begun the attacks, which posed a question. What had triggered the attacks this time? Why had they stopped? What were they starting again? I saw no real answers. Nothing to explain why any of this was happening, and that question hung uncomfortably over me. It was only a few days later that I heard news of another attack. My digging into what Fox had given me hadn't led me to any shocking new revelations. However, I knew I couldn't turn down the chance to look into another attack. So recent too. I remember waking up that morning and coming downstairs to see the news on the TV. Mom was watching it intently, dead silent as she did. I remember her eyes fixated me for a moment, studying me more intently than normal. I offered her a comforting smile as I went over to join her. "Did you eat yet?" I asked. "I can make some breakfast if you haven't." No, I'm fine," she rasped and looked back at the TV. She didn't comment on what she was watching, but she didn't need to. I could see the recognition in her eyes as the anchor recounted the same story I'd heard before. Something had entered the house of someone in Vegreville. It had left no survivors. Once I was sure that Mom would be okay on her own for a few hours, I headed out to the neighborhood where the attack had happened. I kept my distance, of course, and parked my car just down the street. I could see flashing police sirens and yellow tape blocking the area off. No way I was going to get close to it, and I wasn't quite interested in trying my luck. I could see a few neighbors speaking to the officers and dared to let myself creep closer. Maybe if I couldn't go in, I could at least ask a few questions. One of the cops looked up at me as I drew nearer. He'd been talking to one of the neighbors, a middle-aged man I'd seen around town from time to time. He stared at me as if I was a ghost. I just chalked it up to shock. "Morning, officer," I said calmly and casually as I could. "What happened here?" "I'm not at liberty to discuss that," the officer said, his tone stern. He looked me up and down, his brow furrowing. "I've been asked not to let people linger around the crime scene. Best you go home. Let us do our work." Of course. "Sorry," I said, faking a smile. I could see the neighbor he'd been talking to still staring at me, brow furrowed in what looked to be anger. The man looked at the officer, then back to me. Our eyes met for a moment before he spoke. I saw you last night." The officer paused and looked over at the man. He drew closer to me. "I remember the car. I remember you. You're the one I saw heading into their backyard." "Excuse me?" I asked. "Going into these people's backyard? Was this guy crazy?" No, it was you," the man insisted. He looked at the officer now. "That's the guy I was talking about. That's the guy I saw going into the backyard." He'd started raising his voice, and the commotion had drawn another officer. I took a step back, and as the man kept shouting, time seemed to become a blur. "Okay, sir, were you present here last night?" I remember the officer asking. "No," I said. "No, I don't usually go down the street. I was home all last night. You could ask my mom. I saw you. Asshole. Don't you dare fucking lie." The neighbor spat. "I saw your shit-ass car on the street, and I saw you going into their backyard. I saw it, and I've got it on my porch camera." "It wasn't me," I cried. "I wasn't here last night. I can prove it. Asshole." The man was in my face then, eyes locked to mine and screaming. I remember the officer stepping between us. Although his posture suggested he was trying to protect the man screaming at me rather than the other way around. In my peripheral vision, I saw two other officers watching me. They seemed too close for comfort. "Sir, would you mind coming down to the station?" he asked. His voice indicated that I didn't have much of a choice. "We just want to ask you a few questions." My mouth suddenly felt dry. I could feel my pulse racing, but I still forced myself to say yes. I'd been at home all night. There was no way it was me that man had seen last night. Was there? At the station. I watched the footage of my own car parking on the street outside what I now knew to be the home of Leon and Taylor Baker, along with their two sons. I could see myself clearly on that footage walking into their backyard. Not a man who looked like me. And I couldn't come up with a single reason why I'd been on that film to the stony-faced detective I'd been in the room with. All I could do was sputter incompetently as he sighed and placed me under arrest. As I was led to a holding cell, I felt like I was in a dream state, ready to wake up at any second. What was happening didn't feel like reality anymore. I felt like I was drifting through something strange and incomprehensible. As I laid down on the cot they'd provided me, listening to drunkards in the next tank over, my heart was still pounding. My blood was racing so loud I could feel it in my ears. I don't remember falling asleep. I'm not sure if I really did fall asleep. I woke up at home about an hour ago. I don't know how much time I've got. I've seen the news about the police station. Apparently, Someone recently escaped one of the holding cells and left 8 officers dead in their wake. That someone wasn't named, and yet the way my mom looked at me when I came downstairs said enough. Her lips were sealed tight and silent tears streamed down her cheeks as I stood at the bottom of the stairs, staring at the TV. I looked over at her and watched as she continued to cry. "I'm sorry," was all she managed to say. "I thought you'd be different than your father. I thought that when he died, this would all be over. I know you didn't mean to do any of it. I know that he didn't either. It's just that work could be so stressful for him, and when the stress came, it came out." I stared quietly at her, watching her bury her head in her hands. My whole body was trembling. "It?" I asked her. "The wolf in him, it's in you too. He never could control it. Oh God, I'm sorry. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't think you'd believe it was you. I didn't know what to do. Her final words were cut off into empty sobs, and I quietly withdrew back up the stairs. I don't know if I fully understand what's been happening to me. I realize now that there are gaps in my memory. Things I did that I can't remember, things I don't think I want to remember. I can hear the police sirens getting closer. I know I don't have much time. I'll try and go peacefully, but I don't know if whatever is in me, whatever was in control during those hours, I can't remember, will go without a fight. I think I'm going to die soon. I don't know. I don't know much anymore, but there is one thing I'm sure of. I think I found the Dogman of Vegreville, and I think that it's me. The Michigan Dogman. I've always been fascinated by urban legends and tales of supernatural creatures. I've heard of the Dogman since I was young when I first heard the legend played on the radio. A mysterious creature said to roam the forests of the Great Lakes region. And with my fascination came a sense of wanting to find the creature and to see for myself if it was really out there. Armed with a curious mind and a flashlight, I set out to explore the woods near my hometown. It was an overcast night, with only the dim glow of the stars to guide my path. As I ventured deeper into the forest, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was being watched. Every rustle of leaves and snap of a twig sent shivers down my spine. But I pressed on, my curiosity overpowering my unease. Little did I know how much of a mistake it was to ignore my instincts. After what felt like hours of wandering, I stumbled forward. An eerie silence blanketed the forest as if a switch was flipped and all the sound in the world disappeared. Something drew me toward it, an invisible force urging me to step closer. That's when I surveyed my surroundings in detail and saw it. A pair of glowing amber eyes staring back at me from the shadows. My heart skipped a beat as the creature revealed itself. A massive canine-like figure, standing upright on 2 legs. Its fur was matted and dark, and its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. It was a Dogman, and it had fixed its gaze upon me. A primal fear surged through my veins, and I stumbled back, dropping my flashlight in the process. And with but a moment's hesitation, I turned and ran as fast as my legs could carry me. The sound of heavy footsteps pounded behind me, growing louder and closer with each passing second. I could hear its snarls and the sharp snapping of its jaws. Hungry for the chase, my breath grew ragged, and my muscles screamed in protest. But the adrenaline fueled my desperate sprint. Branches whipped against my face, and the forest floor seemed to rise up to trip me. But I pushed through, determined to escape the clutches of the monstrous Dogman. My lungs burned, and my vision blurred as I reached the edge of the woods. My house stood just a few yards away, its lights providing a beacon of hope, summoning the last reserves of my strength. I sprinted across the yard and flung open the front door. I slammed it shut, panting heavily as I leaned against it, my heart racing in my chest. I felt a mixture of relief and terror as I looked through the window and saw the Dogman standing at the edge of the clearing, his gaze fixed upon me, its mouth curled into a wicked snarl, revealing sharp, glistening teeth in what looked like a cruel and deranged smile. For a moment, we locked eyes, a battle of wills between human and beast. I knew that I had escaped, but the encounter had left an indelible mark on my soul. The Dogman had shown me the darkness lurking just beyond the realm of our understanding, and it was a sight I would never forget. To this day, I am plagued by the memory of that night. The image of the Dogman's glowing eyes and sinister grin haunts my dreams, a constant reminder of the terrors that exist in the shadows. I warn anyone who dares to venture into the Michigan wilderness. Beware the Dogman's domain. It may be an urban legend to some, but for those who have encountered its malevolence, it is all too real. The forest hides its secrets well, and the Dogman waits patiently for its next victim. Ever since then, I haven't been able to look at the woods without a shudder going down my spine, hoping to not see the amber eyes staring back at me. If I were to give you all any advice, it would be, do not go out at night. There's something standing on two legs outside our tent, and it's not human. It's been over 6 years since this has happened, but I still wake up in a cold sweat every now and then. I started using Reddit about 2 months ago, and just now discovered this subreddit. I think this would be a good place to share my experience and ask if anybody knows what I encountered. I won't disclose where I went camping because I'm afraid it's still out there. I will say it's in the west region of America with some good forests. Anyway, let's get started. My girlfriend, now wife, and I were going through a tough time. Her father just died, and I had lost my license because of speeding. We needed something to take our minds off of everything, so we decided to go camping. We were both nature people. Deal with it. After about 2 weeks of planning, we found a good time and spot. In that 2-week period, I managed to get my license back, so that was good. For this story, I won't give my girlfriend's real name for privacy reasons, so her name will be Elizabeth. We packed all the essentials we would need of a week out in the woods. Tents, clothing, first aid kit, flashlights, a lighter, food, cooler, knives, a machete, $150 for an emergency, playing cards, a guitar, etc. Also, I brought a CZUSA 85 combat pistol just in case. Thank God I did. We packed all of our things into the car, and we were on our way. I'll spare you the 4-hour drive. We stopped at a Burger King about 9 miles away from our destination to recharge our batteries and to stretch. Elizabeth pulled out her phone and looked at the weather only to see that it was going to rain for the entire week. Great, now what are we going to do? She asked. I guess we should get to the campsite to set up the tents before it's too late. I suggested. We did just that. When we got to the campsite, it started to rain a bit, so we started to unpack as fast as we could. While we were unpacking, we noticed that this campsite was recently used, and the people who were previously there had no respect for nature. There was garbage everywhere. Every third step you would hit a can of beer or a plastic bag, and I think at one point I saw an unopened box of tampons. The wind started to pick up too, so all the trash began to fly around in random directions. When we finally got the tent set up and things inside, the rain really started to come down. We managed to secure the tent well, but the rain fly almost blew off, while Elizabeth remained inside to set up the cots. I went out with my poncho and a hammer to secure the rain fly, while pounding the stakes into the ground. I felt a cold wave of dread wash over me. I don't know why. I just felt uneasy. It was as if something was watching me over my shoulder and I didn't know. By now, it was getting pretty dark. If I had to guess, it was about 8:45-ish. I finished securing the rain fly and was about to head inside when I heard a howl a distance away. I thought it might be wolves, but it sounded off, like a cross between a scream from a human and a howl from a coyote. I got goosebumps. I headed inside and zipped the door shut. Elizabeth and I snuggled until we both fell asleep. For the next 2 days, nothing too eventful happened, but the third night is when it appeared. There was no rain that night either. As we were sleeping, I woke up to the same howl I had heard 2 days prior. But the thing that scared me the most is that it was closer. I shook Elizabeth's shoulder to wake her up. She gave me a partial half-asleep stare. Babe, there's something out the dash. I was cut off by the howl again, but now it was like 200 yards away. That was enough to wake her. She sat up with sweat pouring down her face and shirt. "Why is it coming towards you us?" said Elizabeth with fear in her eyes. That's when it dawned on me. We left some food outside after making dinner. It was probably going for our food. We sat in the tent holding each other, shaking with fear in pitch black dark. All of a sudden, we hear the howl again, but it was deafening. It was at our campsite. We heard it walking around looking for the food. Well, it found it. We heard what sounded like muffled screaming and loud thumping as it devoured our rations. Elizabeth was hugging me tight and crying into my shoulder. I was frozen, just staring into the direction of the noise. The thing kept making these noises and screaming for like 3 minutes, until Elizabeth sobbed into me making some noise. The thing stopped eating. It knew we were there. I embraced Elizabeth and started to silently cry too. This thing actually started to walk towards us. I thought, if I'm going to die here, I won't go down without a fight. I felt around for 2 things, my flashlight and my gun. I found those 2 things in about 2 seconds. I turned on my flashlight and pointed it into the direction the thing was. What I saw made me scream. I saw the silhouette of a creature the size of a full-grown German shepherd, but way skinnier through my tent wall. But what scared me the most is that IT stood up on IT's hind legs and began to touch the tent. I snapped out of it and took 1 shot at the thing. Bang! It let out the most haunting, blood-curdling scream. I can't even describe it in words. I kid you not. It turned around and ran away on 2 legs. We stayed awake for the rest of the night, fearing it might come back. Luckily, it didn't, but we still heard its screams. At the crack of dawn, we grabbed all we could, jumped into my car, and drove out of that area as fast as we could. There was no time to even dismantle the tent. We ended up staying in a hotel for the rest of the trip. That spare cash we brought was worth it. We ended up leaving half of our stuff in the woods, but we didn't care. During the whole car ride out of the area, Elizabeth was crying and hugging my arm. After we returned home, we moved 1 month later. Elizabeth ended up going to therapy for 4 months to recover. We now have a baby boy and are living far away from our old home and the woods. We actually have a fear of camping now, but we live in a city now, so there's no problem. If anybody knows what we saw, please let me know, and may God return the thing we saw back to its home, hell. Thanks for joining me on Enigma of the Unknown. If these stories left you with a chill, you're not alone. Many believe the Dogman is out there, just waiting to be seen. Don't forget to subscribe for more terrifying tales, and share this video with anyone daring enough to listen. Stay safe, stay curious, and always keep an eye on the shadows. Until next time, remember, some legends are more real than we think.